today. I feel like pleasing you.
Ciao, oggi parliamo di pace, ma non come quelli che si riempiono la bocca con pace, 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 o che addirittura invocano la guerra per ottenere la pace. Dobbiamo armarci per avere la pace. No, oggi parliamo di pace grazie a Roger Waters, che ha fatto un intervento il 17 febbraio 2025 all'ONU, alle Nazioni Unite. E questo intervento è storico perché lui inizia dicendo, voi magari vi chiedete, ma cosa vuole questo? Che credenziali ha? È un vecchio musicista. Roger Waters faceva parte dei Pink Floyd e già nei Pink Floyd lui si occupava degli orrori della guerra. Perché? Perché quando lui aveva 5 mesi, suo papà fu ucciso, era in guerra, ad Anzio. E quindi questo concetto di guerra, l'orrore della guerra è rimasto in lui, tant'è vero che nei Pink Floyd, anche in The Wall, anche nel film c'è un'immagine appunto di questi aerei, questo dolore immenso della guerra. Bene, il suo intervento lui da parecchio si occupa di questo, è strano che parlino di pace, di libertà, quelli che sono considerati vecchi musicisti. I nuovi musicisti che fanno? Certo, c'è qualcuno che va avanti, che fa video, che fa brani, che fa cose importanti, ma non ha lo spazio nei mass media. I mass media vogliono quelli che sono allineati, come i soldatini del film The Wall, tutti che vanno così, no? E i nuovi artisti sono tutti allineati. Roger Waters ha fatto questo intervento. Io ringrazio l'antidiplomatico che lo ha sottotitolato. Il canale è l'antidiplomatico, quindi grazie all'antidiplomatico ecco l'intervento di Roger Waters all'ONU.
Okay, as the previous speaker has already said, we're here today because it's the 10th anniversary of the signing in Belarus of the Minsk II agreements. Why are these agreements important? Well, because the people of Ukraine are divided. They are either pro-Russian or anti-Russian. I sense an objection somewhere out here in this room, a questioning of my credentials, so forgive me. I feel a sort of, what does he know? He's just some old musician. Well, I may be just a musician, but I'm here to talk about war and peace and love, and my credentials are firmly in place. I do know this. Hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, and all their sons and daughters, and aunts and mothers and fathers and uncles and cousins and friends are in this room with us today. The dead soldiers haunt me. The surviving loved ones haunt me. I feel their pain. I feel their presence in this room, and it is haunting. My father was killed on the morning of the 18th of February 1944, defending the Anzio bridgehead in Italy from the Nazis. I was 5 months old that day. Tomorrow is the 18th of February. So tomorrow, I will have carried these credentials in this broken heart for 81 years. Where was I? Minsk II. The pro-Russian, anti-Russian division in Ukrainian society. I guess we have to visit Maidan. In November 2013, protests started in Kyiv against the pro-Russian government of President Yanukovych. These protests climaxed between the 18th and 20th of February 2014, when fierce fighting between Maidan activists, police, and unidentified others resulted in the deaths of almost 100 civilians and 13 policemen. Like most of you, I only watched it on TV. Was it just a noisy and very deadly political clash between different factions in Ukrainian society, or was it more complicated than that? Was there outside interference, for instance? Did I see Senator John McCain on the podium, sticking his oar in? We've all listened to the famous cell phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeff Pyatt, together calmly picking out a new Ukrainian president. Who could forget Victoria Nuland's casual aside? The EU. Whatever it was, it all turned very nasty. Dead bodies everywhere. Who started it? Who fired the first shot? This is one of the problems with regime change, isn't it? Dead bodies. They're all somebody's loved one. It looks as if all the talks in Maidan's aftermath that led up to Minsk II a year later were a very necessary and worthy attempt to find a solution to a deadly problem in a deeply divided society. Minsk II smells like common sense to me. But there's another smell in the story, though. Some say the new government in Kiev was unduly influenced by right-wing factions like the Right Sector and the followers of Stepan Bandera. If you don't know who Stepan Bandera is or was, you shouldn't be here. You should be at home watching the Bill Maher show or reruns of the Kardashians. Anyway, immediately after the change of government in 2014, Crimea seceded from Ukraine and joined the Russian Federation. Did it secede, or was it annexed? Take your pick. We could always ask the people on the ground. Let's have a look, shall we? In a referendum held at the time, 95% of Ukrainians in Crimea voted to secede. Fair enough. Okay, the years rolled by until in 2019, a new president was elected, a popular actor called Volodymyr Zelensky. He ran his campaign on a promise to resurrect and implement Minsk II. He won in a landslide. Did he implement Minsk II? No. Then what? Well, then things got worse. The Russians kept saying, things are getting worse. So, excuse my ridiculous accent. But this was the time of Russiagate. Anything a Russian said fell on deaf ears. There was no grown-up conversation about Ukraine in the USA. No one in Washington, for instance, had taken in Ambassador William J. Burns' cable of 10 years earlier, entitled Niet means Niet. It was about Russia's concerns over a nuclear-armed NATO member, Ukraine, on its doorstep. Like many other red line warnings, it was ignored. The severity of artillery attacks on the Donbass increased. The Minsk agreements, long forgotten or ignored. On February the 24th, 2022, the chickens came home to roost. Russian troops crossed the border into Ukraine, and Ukrainian and Russian soldiers started dying. My blood ran cold on that day. War? Are you serious? Why wasn't this avoided? Could this have been avoided? Of course it could have been avoided. It's called diplomacy. It's called common sense. It's called talking to one another. War is only ever an option as an absolute last resort. Except, of course, it isn't, is it? If you think about it, we have come to accept war as a way of life. To quote General Smedley Butler from 1935, quote, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious, and it is the only racket that is international in scope. Who profits from the racket? Rich people do. Oligarchs. Since the Second World War, the racket has been our constant companion. Korea, Vietnam, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Palestine. Well, Palestine isn't really a war, is it? Don't get me started. Back to Ukraine. It looked as if the war in Ukraine might die stillborn because people started talking to each other. Mr. Zelensky started talking to Mr. Putin. And by the end of April, a ceasefire agreement had been negotiated and agreed in Istanbul. But then the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, arrived in Kyiv with a message. Hello, Volodymyr. A word in your ear. Forget Istanbul and Minsk and all that. Between you and me, this war suits the Americans down to the ground. They think it'll weaken Russia. So it's been decided to continue it for as long as it takes. And just between you and me, the longer it takes, the better. They'll keep sending you ammo, of course, and they'd like you to, well, you know, just fight on. Wow. Later that year, I wrote letters to Volodymyr's wife, Mrs. Zelenska, and President Putin. I blathered on to Mrs. Zelenska about similarities between Cuba and Ukraine and suggested that the reason we survived the existential crisis in '62 was largely explained by the fact that our leaders, Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy, spoke to one another on the telephone like civilized human beings, and common sense prevailed. Wouldn't it be nice if our leaders today spoke to one another on the telephone like civilized human beings and common sense prevailed? All right, I've run out of time. I'm sure you've all heard by now that two of our leaders have already answered that call. Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin have spoken to one another on the telephone. That, gentlemen, is, or could be, in this musician's humble opinion, a move in the right direction. Maybe there is a glimmer of light at the end of this dark tunnel of war. It's come 3 years and hundreds of thousands of priceless lives too late. But maybe, just maybe, it's a start. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.